The first scream rose with the morning wind, sharp and sudden, scattering the crows from the frozen rooftops. By the time the echoes died, the town had already gone back to pretending it hadn't heard. Snow kept falling, soft and slow, covering all things that hurt to look at too long. Beneath that pale silence, two women knelt on the wooden boardwalk outside Mercer's trading post, their hands raw, their pride unbroken. Nayeli, older by minutes but steadier by years, kept her chin lifted. Beside her, Tiana's breath came quick with anger, not fear. They were meant to scrub the boards clean before the sun rose high, but the snow kept undoing their work, burying every effort under white. It felt like the world mocking them again. Inside, Jack Mercer watched from the window. The glass had frost around its edges, framing the scene like a memory he couldn't yet claim as his own. 35 and tired of pretending to be the kind of man the West demanded, he still wore his pride like armor. Once a drifter, now a store owner, Jack believed he'd rescued the sisters from starvation when he found them by the river weeks ago. He'd told himself it was mercy. The town had whispered it was pity. But when Sheriff Brackett came by and said, "They'll need to earn their keep," Jack had nodded, because it was easier to agree than to feel. He told them to work, sweep, clean, serve coffee to men who stared too long. And every time their hands moved, he told himself it was kindness, not control. Still, something in their silence unsettled him. They spoke little, yet their stillness accused him more than words could. Old Nora, the saloon cook, sometimes slipped them biscuits when no one watched. She called them child though both were grown women, and whispered, "A soul that's been burned don't owe nobody its smoke." The sisters would smile softly, as if they already knew. Tommy, the stable boy, liked to bring them water. He once asked why they didn't just leave. Tiana answered, "Because leaving doesn't mean you're free." Every night, Jack drank a little more, staring at the empty road that led north toward the river. Sometimes he imagined riding back there, undoing his choices. But the West was full of men who had no practice in undoing things. One night, when the whiskey burned too warm, he told himself he was teaching them survival. That lie sat in his chest like a buried stone. The days stretched on, each one quieter than the last. The town's laughter grew louder in their silence. Nayeli worked with calm precision, eyes always on the horizon. Tiana, restless, began to speak less to her sister and more to the wind. When she did talk, it was sharp, clipped, her voice a match striking against the cold. Jack heard her one morning whisper, "He doesn't know he's building his own cage." He pretended not to understand. The snow thickened near the year's end. The saloon smelled of smoke and wet leather. Jack's patience wore thin with the weather, with himself, with the sisters who refused to bend the way he thought kindness required. One afternoon, he caught Tiana staring at the mountains beyond town and snapped, "You'll work when I say you work." The words came out harsher than he meant. She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, steady as a river stone. Nayeli rose beside her, quiet but resolute. "We won't follow your orders," Nayeli said, her voice low but carrying. "You'll be sorry for this." The room seemed to breathe with her words. The wind outside howled like something awakened. Jack froze, shame flaring through his chest, though he didn't yet know what part of himself he was defending. Around them, the townsfolk fell silent, heads turning toward the sound of rebellion. He should have felt angry. Instead, he felt small, as if the world had suddenly revealed a truth he'd been too cowardly to see. These women were not his debt to pay off, nor his burden to shape. They were the storm itself, and he'd mistaken their endurance for obedience. Nayeli took her sister's hand. They stepped out into the snow, bare feet pressing against frost until the skin blushed red. No one stopped them. Not even Jack. He stood there, the cold rushing through the door they'd left open, the wind full of ghosts and unsaid apologies. Snowflakes clung to their braids as they vanished into the white horizon, turquoise fading into pale distance. Jack wanted to call after them, to say something that would make the world unbreak itself. But the words never came. He only watched until they were gone, until the storm swallowed them whole, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he'd lost servants, or met his salvation. The storm came harder that night, thick and merciless, as if the sky itself wanted to punish what pride had built. Jack Mercer woke to the sound of the wind clawing at his shutters, and in that wild cry, he thought he heard their names carried through the dark. He sat up, chest heavy with the taste of guilt. The fire had died in the hearth, leaving the room hollow and cold. He rose, pulled on his coat, and told himself he only meant to look, only to be sure they hadn't frozen somewhere close by. But the truth was simpler. He couldn't bear the silence their absence had left. The streets were empty. Snow had swallowed the boardwalk, the hitching posts, even the tracks of horses. He called once into the dark, and the sound came back to him like an echo of regret. Each step felt heavier than the last, boots sinking deep into the drifts. The world had no color left, it was all gray and white and shame. He thought of Naeli's calm defiance, of Tiana's fire, and how easily he'd mistaken their strength for insolence. The storm bit through his gloves, but he kept walking north, toward the river where he'd first found them, half-starved and still unbowed. Behind him, the town slept. Only old Nora stirred at her window, watching the faint glow of his lantern fade into the dark. She crossed herself once and whispered to no one, "May the fool find what he lost before the dawn takes him too." Jack found their trail by accident, broken branches, a scrap of turquoise ribbon half buried in snow. He followed it until his breath came sharp and ragged, until the world blurred and the wind turned his name into a question. Then, between two pines heavy with frost, he saw them, huddled close, the faint shape of sisters clinging to one another for warmth. For a moment, he thought they were gone. But when he knelt beside them, Naeli's eyes opened, slow and steady, and found his face. "You came to bring us back," she murmured. Her voice was a whisper frayed by cold. He shook his head, breath shaking. "No. I came to bring you home." Tiana stirred, weak but alive, her lips trembling with something close to a laugh. "You don't know what home means to us." He didn't. Not truly. But as he looked at them, frozen, proud, unbroken, something inside him bent, not in defeat, but in surrender. He pulled his coat around them both, lifted Tiana against his chest, and started the long walk back. The snow fought him every step. The wind howled that he had no right. But he kept going, because mercy, once learned, demands movement. The journey back blurred into a dream of pain and repentance. He thought of every man who had taken what was not his, land, dignity, spirit, and how easily he had become one of them. By the time the first lights of the town appeared through the storm, he was no longer sure what he would find there. He only knew he would not return to the man who had sent them away. The saloon doors creaked when he pushed them open. The few men still drinking fell silent, eyes flicking from him to the women in his arms. Snow clung to his hat, his shoulders, the hem of his coat. He laid Tiana on a bench by the fire, and Naeli sank beside her, trembling but unafraid. Old Nora rushed forward with blankets. The sheriff rose halfway, uncertain whether to scold or salute. Jack took off his gun belt and placed it on the bar. "They don't work for me anymore," he said softly. "They never did." No one spoke. Only the fire crackled, filling the room with its steady, human sound. The sisters leaned close to one another, their faces turned toward the warmth. Jack looked at them, two lives he had tried to cage, and saw not defiance, but the quiet strength of those who endure. When dawn finally came, the storm had broken. The snow outside was gold in the new light, the world reshaped by silence. Jack stood at the threshold, watching the horizon where sky met white earth. Behind him, footsteps approached. Naeli's voice came low, almost kind. "You were wrong to keep us," she said. "But maybe you were right to come." He turned, met her gaze, and nodded once. "Then maybe there's hope yet." She didn't answer. The morning wind moved through the open door, cold and clean, and the three of them stood in its breath. Three souls remade by a night that had taken everything but left behind the chance to begin again. The light deepened. Somewhere beyond the river, a coyote called, long and lonely, as if naming what still waited to be healed.